Hello, I'm Bob Ganzak, and this is Motivation You, the podcast. Welcome to Motivation You, the podcast from here at Spurrier's Gridiron Grill and Celebration Point. And we have a great guest today. We're going to have so much fun. I'm not sure where it's going to go, but we're going to go someplace and we're going to get there together. And that's the key of what we do here. Of course, Motivation You, the podcast, is all about leadership and the fact that there are great leaders in every community. And sometimes they don't have the most popular name or they're not the person that everybody knows, but they're making an impact on people's lives. And we're going to try to uncover some of those individuals today. If you're looking for that Dale Carnegie class, you can go to www.dalecarnegie.com. As a matter of fact, if you go to jacksonville.dalecarnegie.com, you'll find our local classes. We have one coming up in Jacksonville June 23rd, and then another one coming back to Gainesville in September. So please go sign up and see what that is all about. My guest today, Nathan Whitaker. I've just been reading your bio. Usually I don't read bios. I like to just find out about the person, but welcome to the program.
Thank you, Bob. It's great to be here.
And so one of the questions I have is that Nathan's background is Gainesville since you were how old?
Since I was 3.
3 years old. So you've basically lived here. You played football at Duke.
Correct.
Okay. How did you get to Duke? What was the process of going to Duke, and why did you choose Duke?
Right. Well, I tell you what, I would have loved to have played here at Florida. And years later, I had a Duke professor say, well, I guess it worked out pretty well. And I said, well, I guess you've never been to a Florida-Georgia game. So I would have loved to have played here. Try-hard guy, right? Not as talented as a bunch of people. Was actually recruited to play baseball at Duke. And so I signed to play baseball and then walked on in football. So I played a year of baseball, batted 191. The coach who brought me in got fired. And so the new coach kind of cleaned house and then played football. And so had the chance to play for Coach Spurrier because I came in right at the same time Coach Spurrier was coming in. And so we taught him everything he needed to know for Florida. Yeah. And then he came down and put all that to use.
And that's my point. Here is a young man that grew up a Gator fan, living in Gainesville, and what are the chances you go off to Duke and you play for Coach Spurrier?
Right.
You know, and you think about that, it's amazing.
Right.
You know, because you didn't go there to play for Coach. You got there first. Right. Was he assistant coach or offensive coordinator when you got there? Or?
No, he was actually out of football because he had been with the Tampa Bay Bandits in the USFL, and they had folded, and so he was out for I think a year. And so I arrived on campus. Actually, he got hired the summer I was coming, so I'd already committed to play baseball, and then he got hired around that time. Our athletic director at the time, Tom Butters, made 2 pretty solid hires. One guy was out of work, Coach Spurrier. And the other guy had a losing record at Army, Mike Krzyzewski. And so Coach Butters could really spot some talent there, right?
Yeah. That is, though, you know, that's the thing when I looked at your bio that just intrigued me was, you know, you're so involved in the Gainesville area and Florida and being a fan and being a supporter, yet the two of you connected at you know, someplace else. So when you were growing up here, what was life like? You played sports in local schools, or what was that? Tell us about that.
Sure. I did. I played from an early age, played baseball, basketball, and football, and unfortunately didn't play the lifelong sports like tennis and golf and things. But it's hard to sometimes.
You can
find
always
people
take
play.
those up.
I can take those up, and sadly, I've been learning the hard way with both those too. So I played those, and then hit high school, and I think it was my 10th grade year. The basketball coach at Eastside High School, where I went to school, told me I was deceptively weak, and I think he was trying to encourage me, but I realized that he probably was right, that I was even weaker than I looked. And so my basketball days were about over at that point. And so I still played football and baseball, and really loved both. I just wanted to be around sports. And so frankly, if you'd have said, hey, you know, go play X sport and whatever, and you can keep playing it for a while, I'd have done it. And so I was trying to play both and do both of those, and had the opportunity to go to, I was recruited by kind of the Ivies, Duke in baseball, North Florida, some others, had some chances to walk on, and then ended up at Duke. It seemed like the biggest fish of kind of I probably might have fit in better at a Dartmouth or a Cornell or something, but I tried to go to the Division I thing. And
Duke's such a great university. It had to be just an incredible 4 years for you, just to be up there with the athletics. That community is so beautiful too. I did the Tobacco Road when my kids were getting up there into high school years. I wanted to take them to other colleges and let them see that, get some of that feel into their life. And so we did the Tobacco Road, you know, went to all 4 of the universities, spent some time there walking the campuses. And for somebody that's a sophomore or a junior in high school, that is just an incredible experience for them. You know, it kind of gets them focused towards what life can be. My daughter ended up at UF, my son at UNF, but that experience was great for them along the road. What did you play in baseball?
I was a shortstop. I played actually the corners of the infield. I'm not terribly fast, but I'm also, as we already touched on, weak. And so my high school coach at Eastside had played. Actually, one of my coaches was Steve Russell, who's an icon here on the radio, and then David Baines had played at Florida and then in the minors, and so David was my coach my senior year, and he said, you're not big enough to play first in college, and that's where I've been playing. So he moved me to short. So I played short at Duke, and so I fit right in with the weak hitting. These shortstops now who mash the ball, that was not how I was built.
Nathan, but you know, I don't know what years you played at Duke, but I played at the University of Detroit back in the early 70s. So my years at U of D coincided with Dick Vitale's years there. So Vitale was our basketball coach. I played baseball. As a matter of fact, I'm going up to, we lost our baseball coach from U of D. He had coached there from the early 60s into the 2000s when they dropped the sport. Okay. So he impacted a lot of lives in over 40 years. I mean, Coach Miller is in the Michigan Sports Hall of Fame, was one of the whiz kids for the Phillies back in the early 50s, pitched the 4th game of the World Series back then in his rookie year against Whitey Ford, got beat, but still he was there. Still holds some records, and his son Bobby's probably watching us right now, and he'll point those things out to us down the road. But we're having a memorial for him. He passed away during COVID, so in a couple of weeks we're going up for a golf outing, and there's going to be a couple hundred guys that played for him over the years that are going to come out and celebrate his life. So, but my point of saying that is that when you talk about shortstops nowadays, you know, if you hit 200, or you said you hit 191.
Right.
Right. You mentioned that to me.
Right.
My goodness, you're an all-star if you hit the 191. It seems like, you know, there used to be the Mendoza line that you couldn't hit below that because, you know, you wouldn't be playing any. Now guys are making 15, 20 million a year hitting 200.
Yeah, the game has changed.
If you didn't hit 300 when we were kids, you didn't play.
Right, they don't choke up. They're still, 2 strikes, swinging for the fences. It's a different game, but I was able to hit 191 with no power, so that's really a tough combination.
You know, it's funny you say choke up. I was out at a birthday party. My wife's grandkids, they love their athletes, incredible athletes. And so I was pitching to one of them, and I told him to choke up, and he didn't know what I was talking about.
Right. It's a lost art.
They don't do that anymore. So, what was it about your coaches that that kind of shaped you as a young man? You're very humble. You're very humble. You've shown that a couple of times by talking. I'm weak. I'm this. I'm that. I understand that. But what was it about your coaches that helped shape your life?
Yeah, so I had, my dad had coached me from early on in Little League and the like, and then coached me up through high school. And in fact, in a strange twist, I left to go to college, and he got hired by Santa Fe College as their pitching coach when I took off, and then came over to the University of Florida for 3 years as their volunteer assistant, was in the bullpen. And so I went off to Duke with these visions of the College World Series, and I did end up there in the stands watching my dad and UF play.
Wow!
So that was a twist.
So your dad coached at UF.
He did. He's an attorney and had coached for years, and then had a chance to Santa Fe brought him on, and then UF.
I see that. So again, I love to uncover these things. And how did he juggle the two? Because I mean, in a major university like the University of Florida,
right,
you have to dedicate your time. No matter if you're an intern,
right,
you're dedicating your time. How did he juggle work, family, and coaching?
Yeah, so he had his own office and had a couple offers when I was in high school to join local firms. He'd started out with firms here in town and then had a chance to join. He also had a chance to become a circuit judge, but realized that he was able to schedule he basically would schedule his law practice to go from 8 a.m. to 2 o'clock, and then he'd take off and go out to Eastside or then Santa Fe or then UF. And he realized either of those settings he wouldn't be in charge of his schedule or his docket if he was a judge. And so
wow,
he did it that way. And so it made for some, it was tough to run a law practice with all that time away, but he did it. And it was great because he and I got to be together a ton, and he really built into me. And then my other coaches as well, some of the ones I've mentioned, but then football coaches as well. Just the amount of time they spent with me. I spoke to the Miami Dolphins a few years ago, and the week before I'd gotten there, they had an exercise where they had to write thank yous to people who had made an impact, and so they had 5 people. And so when I got in to talk to them, they really hadn't circled back, I think, on the exercise. The point of the exercise had been to just do it, and that was great and worthwhile. But before my remarks, I just asked them quickly, I'm like, how many of you wrote to Michael Jordan, or how many of you wrote to Don Shula or whatever? And icons and people that they, of course, had admired as kids growing up. And of course, none of them had, right? They had all written to that high school coach, and they had all written to that next door neighbor or whoever it was that just spent time and built into their lives. And that's how it was for me. That it was those people that, the leaders you talk about that you don't necessarily hear every day, who built into me and made a difference. And it was, it really wasn't Coach Spurrier, the Heisman Trophy winner, who made an impact. It was Coach Spurrier when I was lonely and on campus my freshman year, and I was going over to the football complex for a workout, and was walking over there, and all of a sudden somebody yells, "Nate!" And he's the only person to this day who still calls me Nate. And I turn and see a snowball flying at me, and Coach Spurrier was just out there chucking them around using his quarterback arm. Yeah. But those are the things that I remember, where somebody takes the time to just do something silly and something small and make your day not quite as lonely.
Was that your task to the Dolphins, that they had to write those thank yous?
No, I was coming in to talk on leadership and team building, and it was the week before that somebody had wanted them to talk on gratitude, and I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, because in week 7 of the Dale Carnegie class, we do showing appreciation, and most of our students are, in their from 25 to 70, that come to class. There are many professionals, doctors, lawyers, or just people like Josh Vaughn, who keeps this facility totally clean, entrepreneurs or whoever they are. And it's so, as an instructor, it is so shocking to me that we have such a tough time expressing appreciation to people. We're not brought up that way. And that's why I was asking if that was your task to the Dolphins to
Yeah.
do that, because it's not. We don't.
Let's say it was. Yes, I came up with that, and I thought I was no, but it is true. And then when you do it right, it just feels good. Or heaven forbid you get that note or that call or whatever, and you think, oh my gosh, I had totally forgotten about that interaction, or whatever it might be. Or I figured they were impacted by whomever. I didn't know that. I found out years later when I was playing at Eastside, there was a dad who used to bring his son out. He's 3 or 4 years younger than me, at a rival high school. And every now and then I'd see them in the stands. And it was probably 10 years later that the son said, yeah, my dad had seen you play, and you played hard, and you were undersized, and you played clean, but you know, right up to the whistle or whatever, and you always played clean but really hard. And my dad said, I want you to watch Nathan. And he said, so we'd come to games and watch you. Wow. And I had no idea for 10 years. And again, you know, I joke about batting 191 and all that stuff, but it was humbling, and but it was really gratifying to go, wow, somebody noticed, right? And so anyway, those moments. So when people do show gratitude, you're like, wow, I realize I should do it more.
Yep, we all need to do that. You know, in my own life, I've got like 3 or 4 coaches that were like hugely impactful on my life. My 9th grade football coach, I still stay in touch with, John Pantages. John's a great guy. I'd like to get him on this podcast sometime, although I'm not sure what he would say. You know, he's no filter, no filter.
We can do him on the 5-second delay. Evan can hit the button.
But one of those people is Dick Vitale. I mentioned his name earlier. It just he impacted my life. You said the snowball from Coach Spurrier. I got into radio because of Dick Vitale. You know, he one day I used to hang out in the gym shooting baskets all the time. I was a baseball player there. When I had open time, I just hung out inside and shot baskets with the team and different things. And he asked me, he said, would you be interested in going into radio? Or I need somebody that'll help sportscaster here in town. And I said, sure, I'll do it. You know, and that kind of gave me the itch to go into radio. And if he would have not have done that, but he was just, I never played for the guy. I mean, of course, I wasn't a basketball player. I couldn't jump 2 inches, you know, but he just impacted. I think he impacted a lot of the baseball players there because he loved baseball so much. My point of saying that is when he got cancer here this past year, and I would write him notes all the time on Twitter, just direct contacts, and just watching how he inspired other people during that time was just, and he's kicked it now. I hope he can stay with that, but just an incredible man, and they impact our lives. And, it's just like your coaches in high school.
Right.
Not somebody you had a direct over your lifetime, but they are the people that shaped us, who we are.
Right. And it's helped me, frankly, in leadership roles, and as I look around and realize that gratitude, appreciation, relationship works in every direction, right? It's not just the people who went, but there are times when there are people who might be reporting to me or whatever, and the more I show appreciation to them and say, hey, I really, I noticed what you did, makes a big difference, right? We all just kind of, wow, you noticed, thank you.
And you're doing things when nobody's watching either, It's what you do, and people do watch, even though they're not. Somehow they do. So the big rings. Show me the.
So
what are they?
These little things.
Yeah.
So so this is my 2002 Tampa Bay Buccaneers Super Bowl ring.
All right.
And then this is my 1989 Duke University ACC Championship ring from when Coach Spurrier was there.
All right. I'm going to put you on spot here.
Okay.
Which one has a bigger impact on your life?
Interesting.
If you had to give one of them away, you couldn't ever wear it again, couldn't even be associated with it, which one would you keep?
So, I'm an attorney, so there's no way I'm answering that. I've got the one with 54 diamonds, or then the one, in a lot of ways, this was a springboard to a lot of other things, right? Going to Harvard Law School, and I think Harvard thought they were going to get some big strapping All-American football player, and I roll in, and they're like, wait, you were the backup kicker, and you hit 191? We didn't mean to let you in. So this opened a lot of doors for me in a lot of ways. And I learned so much under Coach Spurrier. But then this, of course, I haven't taken the Dale Carnegie course. I don't have nearly the personality that I need to have. But it's great to start conversations. I can just sit in the back, and people will go, "Wow, what's that thing?"
I do. I have to get you into one of my classes. I want to work with you just to share the banter back and forth. I love it. I really love it. One of the things I want to ask you about that is, so the Duke ring and the Super Bowl ring, which one was less expected? All right. You know what I mean? Like at Duke, Duke never won anything in football.
Right.
And then Tampa, 0-16.
Right.
So.
Yeah. So it probably was. It probably would have been the Duke, because, as you said, they hadn't won anything they hadn't gone to a bowl since 1961 until Coach Spurrier got there. Mm-hmm. So huge dry spell. But and of course we all hung our hats on the fact that they had hosted the Rose Bowl, and they had played in the 4 major bowls, but those were in the 60s and 50s, and so Duke hadn't done anything in a long time, and even that year, in '89, we started out 1-3, and we're hosting Clemson, and Coach Spurrier said, we're 1-3, Clemson's ranked number 6 in the country, we've got a 1 in a million chance of winning, and we played really well, won that game, and then won our last 7. To go on and win the ACC. So it was an unbelievable year, and the way it unfolded was pretty remarkable. And we had a lot of talent, and they all gelled, and Coach Spurrier did a great job. I was here the other night with a group of county commissioners from around the state, and I'm having dinner, and we're back here in the back room, and there's some Duke stuff set up there in Coach Spurrier's restaurant. And Coach Spurrier walked in, and he saw me, and he was talking to everybody, and he said, "Hey, Nate, what I love to tell these folks is that it's Duke, and it's the fact that I could win there with that talent that the folks at Florida realized." And I'm like, "Coach, I think you're trying to compliment me here, but it's not working." Like, you may as well call me deceptively weak again.
To let you know, Nathan's jersey hangs inside the museum here at Spurrier's Gridiron Grill, on display, bright and blue, and Duke blue, not Florida blue. And that's got to be something that from being a young man that grew up here, came back here after you've traveled, come back. That's got to be a good feeling. And no matter, you gave me the little background of how it got here, still, that's got to be a great feeling to have that in there.
I've got a friend who says you can't aim it, and I think that's a proof of that, right? I batted 191, and I've spoken to the Duke baseball team 8 times, including speaking at their annual banquet. And now they're ranked, and they've gone to 2 super regionals, and they're playing well and all that stuff. And then I played twice, and I kicked off twice in 4 years. And my jersey's here. Now, again, it's not here because of the accolades, but it's basically here because I didn't lose it, and they wanted some Duke stuff. But still, at times you're like, wow, I never would have thought the backup kicker who hardly ever played would end up with a Super Bowl ring or whatever, and there are just times when doors open, and it's pretty fun and unique and interesting.
But Nathan, doors open for a lot of people, and a lot of people don't recognize it when it opens, or they kick it shut. And it's a talent and an art form to be able to walk through the door and make something of that, which, those are the things that, legends are made of. That's why you are where you are. Because you recognize that, and you had the ability, you're prepared for it. Sometimes we, one of the things that I see in my profession is that we don't prepare for the opportunity. It's like stress. So let's take it from a positive thing to a negative thing, where we're, when the event happened that is stressful, how do we react to it? A lot of times is how we prepared for it, not even knowing what the event was. Do we meditate? Are we calm? Are we able to get? So when the event happens, we react differently than other people do. Same thing on the positive side. Yeah. A lot of doors open to people, but they don't recognize it, or it's not important to them. So that's an incredible fact. On from your standpoint, boom! Look what you've done with it. Share with our audience what you do now, I mean, because you have a large path that you're carving through the world.
Right. So, yeah, it's been really fun and interesting how this has all unfolded. But just to fast forward, and I don't know if you want to touch on how I got there at some point. We can circle back to that.
We will.
But currently writing books, and I've been able to write books on leadership and on team building, and talk about those things with audiences. I speak a number of times a year. I'll be going to Bangkok this fall for a speaking engagement to speak on team building. Wow. And then I'll be going to Minnesota. I just went, anyway, I've been traveling around to a variety of places, speaking on leadership, team building, and then living a life of significance. And I've written books with Tony Dungy, with Tim Tebow, and others, and there's success, and success is good, but as James Brown, who I also did a book with, James Brown of CBS Sports. JB talks about good success and the Bible verse that talks about their success, and there's good success and that idea of significance and how we build into people's lives. And so I've been blessed to have this turn into a whole speaking career where I'm traveling and I'm speaking and I'm able to write. So
how did that happen? How did the speaking life come into you, and what was the path that you took to get that? And what was it inside of you that said, I can do this?
Mm-hmm. So I had a teacher in high school who basically said we had a big class-wide, our entire 11th grade had a big project and they needed somebody to moderate it. Mm-hmm. And so they had different kind of smaller parts, and I kept not getting one of the smaller pieces to moderate a session. And finally I went to the teacher who's heading it up, and I'm like, hey. And he's like, would you just be patient? I have something in mind for you. So he wanted to see how those went. And then sure enough, he tabbed me as the person to run the whole thing for the full day.
Wow.
And I had to learn Robert's Rules of Order and run this whole meeting. But that was a big moment to have somebody say, hey, yeah, you can get up in front of all your peers and run this meeting for 5 hours or whatever. So that was great. So then I get off to college, and we had a Duke football day at the Duke Chapel. And so if you've seen the Duke Chapel, it looks like a cathedral, and it's this very intimidating space. And so they said, we want a player to get up and do a reading. And so like nobody said a word. And I wasn't going to be the backup kicker going, I'll do it. But the quarterbacks passed, and the starters and the Hall of Famers, nobody wanted to do it. And finally Coach Burr's like, Nate, go do this. So I thought, okay. So again, I did it in front of all my teammates. And so I walked out of those moments with this sense of I can do this. And so when I got to the Jags and the Bucks, they wanted people to go out in the community and they wanted to send us out. And so I was on the football side of things, and so they thought I'd have interesting stories of being in the draft room or negotiating contracts, and so they would send me out to go speak at Kiwanis or schools or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so I just did a bunch of speaking, and then all of a sudden these books came along, and people were like, I don't think we can afford Tony Dungy, but we could have you come in and speak on all these leadership principles that you and Tony spoke about. And so that's kind of where it all developed. And so now I've been able to create a little bit of a name for myself and be able to do that
for yourself. You're, again, humble. I've read a lot about since Freddie sent me this. It's just amazing to me. How did you shape your leadership thoughts that you put down into words? I mean, what were the mechanisms that drove you to your leadership style and what you write about?
Right. Well, that's a little bit of an involved story. And so if you want to come to it after the break, we can.
Okay.
But in short, I was able to look at my personality and how I was. And what was really important to me was to clerk for a federal judge and then also work for Tony Dungy, in addition to Tom Coughlin, John Gruden, and some others, and realize that there are a bunch of different styles out there. And that I am not wired the same way as a lot of different people, but that all those styles can work. And so that was really important for me to see that firsthand and to realize, okay, now let me drill down and why can it work with all these different styles?
Okay, we'll jump into that after the break and really dig into it, because that's we got to know you a little bit, your personality and how you got to where you are, just from life and Duke, but really you've impacted a lot of lives, and let's talk about that when we come back from the break, if that's all right with you.
Sounds great.
Coming to you live from Spurrier's Gridiron Grill here at Celebration Point. My name is Bob Ganzak. He's Nathan Whitaker. This is Motivation You, the podcast.
We still hear it. The sound of victory. The joy of being part of something great. And while things may not be the same right now, we haven't gone anywhere. If you bleed orange and blue, then Meldon Law is the firm for you.
Looking for more reasons to celebrate? We have them here at Celebration Point. Enjoy some of the newest additions to our already celebratory lineup, like Dave & Buster's, Les Macarons, and Prime and Pearl. There's always a reason to celebrate. Join us anytime for any occasion. Celebration Point, where Gators come to celebrate.
Hi, Steve Spurrier here. You know, making a reservation at my restaurant is easier than a Saturday afternoon homecoming game against Vandy. You don't have to call or email. Just go to spurriers.com, hit the reservation button, pick a date, a number of guests, and a time. It's so simple, I can do it. In fact, I just did. Maybe I'll see you tonight.
Welcome back to Motivation You, the podcast. My name is Bob Ganzak. This is Nathan Whitaker. We're going to jump into some interesting things. One thing I want to mention to you is that we come to you on YouTube, Facebook, many different places. You can find Motivation You, the podcast, 39 different platforms is what I'm told. And Evan's shaking his head. Our producer is shaking his head. But yes, and if you have a question for myself, for Nathan, please just put it right into Facebook and as just into a comment, and we'll answer that. We were talking during the break about how you got to the book. Now, the book that you wrote with Tony Dungy is called Quiet Strength. Is that
Right. That was his first book. We've now done like 7 others, but that was his first
book. And what was the genesis of that book, and how did you get into your leadership thought process?
Yeah.
Take us through that journey.
So I went to law school, practiced law for a bit, clerked for a federal judge, practiced at a large law firm, and then got a job with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Spent 3 years with the Jaguars.
Okay. What years was that now?
That was 98 to 2000.
So they were pretty good at that time.
Yes, 14-2, played in the AFC Championship game. Coach Coughlin had everything clicking. Mark Brunell, Tony Baselli, Fred Taylor,
Okay.
Kyle Brady.
And what was your role?
Players. So I was in football administration. So I was helping with salary cap and contract negotiations, and then also overseeing the football administration budgeting and the like. Not really doing any legal work, but that was okay. Going to games and practices seemed more interesting than taking depositions, at least for me.
That sounds good to me.
So I was doing that. So after 3 years, I got hired by the Buccaneers. So being a Florida guy was great, able to stay in the state, just switch conferences. And so I came over in 2001, which turned out to be Tony Dungy's last year. So I was there for a year with Tony.
All right.
Incredibly stressful, and spent
But it was a pretty good year, wasn't it?
We were 9-7. We
Went to the playoffs?
went to the playoffs.
Okay.
Lost to the Eagles for the second or third year in a row.
Still lost his job over that.
Still lost his job. And all year we heard the rumors about they were going to hire Bill Parcells, and so that was just always on edge. And I noticed that Tony was never on edge. That Tony was always exactly who you see in public is who he was in private. And the rest of us are jumpy, and we're trying to figure out, okay, if this goes down, am I going to the Falcons? Am I going to we're all looking for we're hoping things work out here, but we've got one foot, kind of at least in the crack of the door thinking, where would I go next? And I've just bought a house in Tampa because I've moved. And so anyway, very stressful. And Tony was never like that. And
calm as could be.
Calm as can be. And he and I were alone one time in the locker room in December, and we'd had all these ups and downs. And I said to him that I just appreciated his witness in light of all the circus going on. I said, Coach, I just really, the way you handle yourself. And he said, Nathan, I can't help but think that there are times when God wants there to be a circus so that people can see there's another way to respond.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even the, hey, we roll with the punches, or hey, tough times come, but it was hey, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be because I'm able to help others. Yeah. So anyway, I filed that away. Tony gets fired, much to my chagrin. Coach Parcells doesn't come. They hire John Gruden. We spend 2 years with Coach Gruden. We win a Super Bowl that following year. And then the next year, my boss, Rich McKay, leaves to go to the Falcons.
Yep.
And Bruce Allen came in, and I worked for him for 8 days. And he said, on day one, he said, I feel your talent, which I wasn't exactly sure what that meant. Maybe that was a good sign. 8 days later, apparently he didn't feel it anymore because he fired me. He fired all of us, and most of us anyway. And so I had an offer. I could have gone to the Falcons, the Seahawks, the Bears, and instead thought that Tony could really help folks with his message. Coach Gruden had come out with a book, and I thought, Tony really has a great message about balance, about priorities, and a lot of things to share.
Mention that little quote on the back of Coach Gruden's book that you read.
Right. So Coach Gruden on the back of his book on the dust jacket, it says, I don't know my wife's cell phone number, but I can call plays in my sleep. And in short, he said something like, and if you too want to be successful at something and you devote yourself to it, then you can get there. And there's a lot of truth to that, right?
And his book sold. And that kind of was like an eye-opener to you, like, wow.
Right. And so there was a market for that. And there's certainly a lot of truth to that. Mm-hmm. But I also read that and thought, man, the year I was with Tony where his kids are running up and down the hall so that my 3-year-old can come and hang out and without any concerns about whatever. Yeah. And it was just this family environment, and that we may be working long hours, but we'll figure out a way to include others, and the priorities are important to us, and figuring out in light of the circus what we're doing and how we're handling ourselves and the like. I thought, man, Tony has such a great message. So I fly to Indy. So I've been fired. I've still got some time on my contract. And I'm like, sweet, I've got 4 months left on my contract. I'm going to use it to write a book.
You're being paid.
I'm being paid, right? I'm like, hey, I'm going to let the rest of my time with the Bucs, I'm going to let the Bucs fund the writing of my book with Tony Dungy. So I fly to Indy, and Tony and I have lunch, and we had stayed in contact during his time in Indy, of course. And so I fly up there, and we have lunch, and I say, hey, I want to write a book, and I want to write a book about you. And Tony says, absolutely not. He says, I've got nothing to share, and nobody wants to hear it. And I said, okay, well, I don't think that's true, but it was kind of a setback. And so all of a sudden this 4 months didn't seem like such a long time. And so Tony said, what I will do, though, is I'll be a part of a book if you wanted to do something about themes or concepts or whatever. So I thought, okay, great. I'll do a leadership book. And it's going to be about Tony's leadership style and how it's different than Nick Saban or from Tom Coughlin or John Gruden. And there's nothing wrong with the way other people lead, but that there's a way that you can lead in a way that's makes sense to who you are, your personality. Mm-hmm. You don't have to learn to raise your voice, but if you're a loud person, then you don't have to all of a sudden turn quiet like Tony. Yep. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to do a leadership book on that. So I was flying around. I'm talking to, Mike Malarkey, who was at Buffalo, and Chan Gailey was at Georgia Tech, and I'm sitting in on staff meetings. I'm flying to Indy, and I'm in their coaches meetings and their player meetings. And so I'm on the sideline when they're playing the Patriots, and just as an outsider, an observer. Now I'm watching, and I'm studying leadership, and I'm looking, how does Peyton interact with his receivers, and what is Tony doing with his other coaches? And I'm behind the scenes for a really interesting debate is probably the best word, between a couple of the defensive coaches in Indy the night before they're playing the Patriots. And they're debating how to cover, I don't think it was Gronkowski, but it was somebody for the Patriots. There was a matchup issue, and how are we going to cover him? What are we going to do? And they're debating it, and Tony's sitting in the room in the back. And I'm just sitting there watching, and Tony's sitting in the back. And the meeting ends, and I come to Tony, and I'm like, you created this defense in Tampa. You and Monty Kiffin came up with this whole thing. Yeah. You knew the right answer, right? You knew and Tony said, I hired these guys to do a job. They knew I was in the room. If they wanted my input, they could ask. But until they needed it, I wasn't going to offer it.
Wow.
And there was a time when they came in and said, what do you think? But he said it was really theirs to run with and theirs to decide. And so it was fascinating to be a fly on the wall for those kind of leadership moments where you're like, when do I step in? When is that micromanaging, right? When do I say, I've hired you to do a job and I'm going to let you do it? And so they came up with the answer on their own. Tony said, great, they own it. That's their decision. We're going to go with it. And so anyway, so I did all that. Those 4 months turned into 2 years. I'm still unemployed. Right, and I think Duke and Harvard both had me on some sort of watch list to take back my degrees if I didn't get a job soon. So I'm unemployed and I'm getting nowhere. And in fact, I'm trying to pitch this leadership book, and publishers are saying, "Is it Tony's book or is it Mike Tomlin's book? Is it? You've got all these people in it." And I'm like, "Well, it's really kind of Nathan's book." And they're going, "Yeah, pass." And so.
But I did all the research.
I did all the research. This is great stuff. And they would come back with, this is great. It is, but we're not sure we understand who's going to buy it based on Nathan Whitaker on leadership in 2006. So the Colts win the Super Bowl. All of a sudden, Tony's phone is ringing off the hook to write a book. And so Tony and I talk, and Tony tells the publishers, I'll do a book, but it's going to be with Nathan. He's never written a book, but I trust him. I know his heart. I know. And so that turns into Quiet Strength. And so that's his memoir. We write it in 30 days.
You wrote that in 30 days.
We did. We were trying to beat the season so that Tony could promote it before the season started, and then he got tied up with that, and there was potentially a new Super Bowl champ.
Did you call him, or how did the connection come up that you finally decided to write the book together?
Oh, I called him. Yes,
and
it was one of those.
What was that conversation like? Was it remember this, or it's time to do this? What was your thought process?
Well, we had been talking throughout about the leadership book, about whatever, and I kept talking. In fact, even when his son, Jamie, passed away, we had talked. We were at the Senior Bowl in Mobile, and he and I were having lunch. He's still with the Colts. I'm just there as a writer and doing other stuff, or a wannabe writer. Yeah. And we're having lunch, and I said, by the way, I know we've been talking about you someday doing a book and whatever. With this, just don't worry about it, right? I'm going to drop bringing this up, and because I don't know how to, this is just too sensitive. This is too whatever. Definitely. And Tony said, actually, and this is 30 days out, keep in mind. Tony said, actually, so many people have reached out to help me that I'm not the only parent dealing with this, unfortunately, that we need to help parents, we need to help kids, we need to help prevent these things, we need to do whatever we can. He said, maybe I do need to do a book. I'm not ready yet, but don't forget me. Don't drop it. Just give me some time and some space. So that was the year they won the Super Bowl then. Fast forward, and they win the Super Bowl. And so I called him, and he said, okay, let's talk. And he literally was at Disney World. He did I'm going to Disney World after the Super Bowl. And so he came down from Indy, and so I drove down I drove over from Tampa at the time to Orlando. And we met at Disney and talked it through, and he was there with his wife, Lauren. And that's when
the rest is history.
The rest is history. So
you've written other books with Tim Tebow?
Right.
How did that book come about? What was that process like? And how did you connect with Tim?
Yeah, so that was one, that was one where growing up in Gainesville and knowing Coach Spurrier and other folks here in the athletic department made a big difference, because then they connected me with Tim, and so the Tebows reached out and we met. And I actually was working on the Mentor Leader at the time, Tony Dungy's leadership book, that we can touch on again here in a second. Yep. But I was working on that at the time when the Tebows approached me. I flew to Nashville, where Tim was training, getting ready for the draft, and they wanted to do a crash book like Tony and I had done in 30 days, and so the whole family's there, and I had to pass, and I was so bummed. Wow. Again, being a Gator and a Gainesville guy and whatever, and thinking how fantastic, of course, Tim is, and I had to pass because I was on Tony's deadline for Tony's book. and it just wasn't going to work. And so I passed, and they moved on, and they reached out like 5 months later, and they said, we still think you're the guy. Can you do it now? And I could. And so that's how that came about. And so that was
just a
great experience and really fun, and so thrilled that came back around, that I could do it.
So back to the Dungy. How many books have you written with Tony Dungy?
So we've done, I think, 7 adult books, which sounds a little weird, except that we've also done like 6 children's books. So we've done a couple of picture books and some early reader books. But we did his memoir, and then we did a book on values called Uncommon. And then we did a book on leadership called The Mentor Leader. And then we did a 365-day daily devotional that each entry is about 350 words. But because there's 365, it ended up being our longest book by far. And then a book on marriage with he and his wife together. And then a book on team building that was very fun, that I get to speak now. I've done a lot of speaking with organizations and on team building and the 4 elements that Tony and I broke out in that book. And
can you share those 4 elements?
Sure. It's called The Soul of a Team, and it's being selfless, owning your role, being unified, and having a larger purpose, or why. And so those 4 things, if you can find a team who can do those 4 things, where the team members can rally around those 4 things, then you have a chance at really being a high-performing team. You know, I've been on teams, I'm sure you have companies, whatever, where we just have the same name, or we have but it's just a bunch of people thrown together.
Yeah.
And then you have
always looking for the next opportunity.
Always looking for the next opportunity, always. Or, you know, the whole I've got my silo and here's my information. That's one of the things we didn't do well in Jacksonville, I think, looking at those days, is that we had the salary cap information over here, and they were keeping some of the scouting information over there, and the coaching information was there. And then I got to Tampa and realized that, you know, we brought Tony Dungy in the room, right? Were we going to re-sign Derek Brooks? Derek was going to have to be extended, and he was, of course, on his way to becoming a Hall of Famer. So we brought Tony and Monty Kiffin, the defensive coordinator, in, and we said, do you want to re-sign Derek? And they said, absolutely. Got to have Derek. And we said, okay, great. You're going to lose this. You're starting middle linebacker next year. You're going to lose your starting left corner next year, and you're going to lose one of the defensive ends if we sign Derek. Or we can let Derek walk, and with the money we'll save on the salary cap, you can have those other 3. But there's a choice to be made. And by bringing them in, laying it all out, and everybody owning it, it was such a better place to be. Yeah. And it was so much healthier.
Last night, listening to 88, Sirius 88, you know, NFL Network, Bill Polian was on. So did you get to work with Bill at all, or was
I was around? So he was in Indy when I was lurking in the shadows studying.
So he talked last night about the Jeff Saturday signing, where same exact thing you were saying about Derek Brooks. He said I had to tell Jeff that I couldn't sign him because of salary cap, and if he was going to walk, you know, I would be his biggest fan, you know, and he told him, he said, go home to your wife, you know, you guys talk about it. This is our offer. This is what I can do. And I can tell you that, you know, I'll guarantee you'll retire a Colt. And so he came back the next day and he said, I'll sign it. Let's do it. And unfortunately, as Bill said, he got fired like a year or 2 years later. Polian did. So they didn't stand up to their word, and Saturday retired as a Green Bay Packer. But those are those things, and it happens in all businesses.
Sure.
I mean, every company has those challenges. The mentor leadership, that strikes me, because a couple of weeks ago we had Dr. Matthew Olson on, who runs the Taylor Leadership Institute at the University of North Florida.
Okay.
And we talked about leadership the whole time. Very interesting man. If you get an opportunity to meet him, you guys, a lot of similarities in your worlds. But, you know, what is it about mentor leadership? That's what they drive there, is they really work with student athletes on mentoring other people. And what is it about mentoring that is so valuable to the person that's never mentored before?
Right. So I think it's really important on its own. It carries value on its own, right? Building into others. I mean, just mentoring others, bringing them along. But I think it's critical from a leadership standpoint. And here's why. The book, The Mentor Leader, that Tony and I did, came out of those notes that I was making for when I was following Tony and those others, and no publishers wanted it. And so after we had done a couple of books, the publisher came back and said, "Hey, Tony, would you do a book on leadership?" And Tony said, and I said, I pulled out stacks of notes that I'd made. And I said, I've got the stuff here. And it's all Tony's stuff. And it's stuff that I come across while watching him meeting with the quarterbacks and the defensive coaches and whatever. And so I had all this leadership stuff. And so I had great concepts on things he did and the way you could be unique. And Tony said, that's all great. And he loved, it was brilliant. What can I say? But then he said, look, but I really want to focus on mentoring, which I really had not developed in all my notes. Brilliant other than that. And I really hadn't talked about mentoring. And Tony said, look, when I leave the Colts, I don't want there to be a leadership vacuum. That if I've done that, then what have I created?
Yes.
And so I've just left. It can't be about me. It's got to be about the organization and what we're building in this team and this concept and this culture. And if I leave and there's a leadership vacuum, then I've failed as a leader. And he said, so I've got to be building leaders along the way. And so that was his focus. And in fact, when he handed it over to Jim Caldwell, right?
Yes.
They had great success until Peyton got hurt. And then all of a sudden Caldwell and Polian and everybody got fired.
Yep, that's when Polian left. Yeah.
Because Peyton got hurt. Yeah. But they were able to do all those things in large part, Tony felt, because it was no longer about Tony. It was about the organization and all the other leaders along the way.
Devil's advocate here, okay?
Sure.
Just on that subject, because you were so much involved in that, and with Coach Dungy, somebody I highly admire. I love the guy. Caldwell got criticized for being successful in Tony Dungy's system, that if you had to do it on his own, he couldn't. That mentoring, how do you draw that line in the mentoring standpoint? So what Coach was doing, Coach Dungy, was, hey, I need to create this atmosphere where people can step in, and I'm developing other leaders. Yet when they step in, how do they grab their own ownership of it? What is it that they have to do as a leader to grab their own ownership?
So I think they've got to be authentic to who they are. And I think Jim always was. And then I think there are just going to be critics who are going to be critics, and you just have to silence those. It's the Bill Walsh, George Seifert thing, right? Bill Walsh built an amazing organization in San Francisco, wrote the Bible that everybody reads on football stuff. He's got the book that every single coach has. It's out of print, but every coach finds it and gets it. And then George Seifert takes over, unbelievably successful.
Takes him to another level.
Unbelievable. Yeah. And yet people still wanted to go, well, yeah, but Bill Walsh, you're his coordinator. And then, well, okay, but he did amazing things on his own. And so if people want to take away, they can. Yeah. And so I'm not sure how you combat that. Because at the same time, you look at all the organizations that had amazing success, and then somebody takes over, and they go down in flames, and nobody goes, well, that was Dungy's organization, and you blew it up. Or,
Well, in the corporate world, what I see in the corporate world, and is, I see a lot of similarities between corporate and sports, and that's why I always try to use those analogies in classes or when I, do workshops or talks. But in the corporate world, you see many a times when somebody is elevated, let's say from a salesperson to a sales manager. Let's just call it that. And they want to put their own stamp on it. They want to differentiate themselves from what had been successful. The guy that retired 30 years as a sales manager with this organization and built the company, and he retires and you replace him with somebody, and instead of just accepting the process that they had built over 30 years, they want to put their own stamp on it, so they make changes, and then they fail.
Right.
I think we see that a lot in sports.
We do.
Where people want to put their stamp on that.
And I think if the stamp is something authentic, if it's, hey, I'm taking over for Nick Saban, I can't be Nick Saban, right? I'm just not wired that way, right?
Right.
So I can't be him. So my stamp is going to be, but I'm also going to keep, he does some really good things, right? I want to keep everything I can at Alabama, right? And then I'll just be me, but I want to keep all this stuff. Or if there's some way to improve it, right? If I'm putting my stamp on it because, hey, he did great things for 30 years, but I think if we do this, if we make better use of some technology or whatever, we figure something out, great. But if we're doing it just to do it, I think at times people just push back against that, right? If we do it and they're like, wait, why is this about Nathan? I thought we were trying to win here.
Right.
Or we were trying to sell widgets or whatever it may be. And now you want me to kiss the ring?
Yeah. Well, It's difficult to, you mentioned it earlier that you just have to quiet the outside noise. Mm-hmm. And I believe that's where probably 99% of all success and failure comes from those that are able to quiet the outside noise and those that are unable to quiet the outside mm-hmm. noise. Because you would have got to that position if you were not capable. Yeah. And yet, when you let those things seep into your brain and affect you in a negative way. You mentioned Nick Saban. Nick, he lost at Michigan State.
Right.
He lost when he was on, Belichick's staff in Cleveland. Mm-hmm. Yet he was honing his own, and he never let anybody. I mean, he had a vision, and he was going to stick to that vision. Sure. He lost with the Dolphins.
Right.
Came back to won at LSU, came back to Alabama, and has just been. Yet he has never wavered from his belief, and I don't think there's any outside noise that ever gets into his head.
Right. One of the things we talked about in those 4 elements of team is the idea of being selfless, and Tony had a great illustration that I've borrowed now. But you sitting there talking to a basketball team, and I was talking to a college basketball team, and I'm like, how many of you want to win the conference championship? And everybody does, right? And I'm like, how many of you want to hit the last second shot? Great. Okay. Are you willing to make the pass for your buddy to make the last second shot to win? And you still get hands. And I'm like, okay, are you willing to get subbed out because they need a better defensive player for the last 30 seconds? And so you're on the bench when that, or are you willing to be subbed out, or whatever it is? And you start to see hands waver. And you're like, okay, is it the outside voices? Do you need the credit? Do you need to hear that, hey, you're a great leader, you're a great whatever? Or do you really want us all to win? And is it that important to you? And it's not that you have to give up your individual goals, your where you want to go and whatever, but for this moment in time on this team, are you willing to be okay with other people getting credit? And it's hard sometimes.
Yeah, it is. Nathan, where are you going future? We have 3 minutes left in this program. I mean, people wonder why you go to a sports bar and you talk for 6 hours, and you're, how did you spend 6 hours at a sports bar? Because you sit and chat, right? You have a conversation just like this.
Right.
What's the future for Nathan Whitaker? What are you carving out from, this date, May 26th forward?
Yeah. So I really love speaking to teams and to companies. So I'm going to continue to speak on team building, leadership, why we do what we do, living a life of significance. One of the topics that's been coming up lately that I've been working on a book as well about is on resilience. And people keep talking about resilience and or needing it. And that, one of the things that I've learned is that a lot of times there are opportunities that come, but a lot of times the opportunities are disguised as a door getting slammed in your face or failing or hitting 191 or whatever it is, that we just have to keep pushing through. And eventually knowing that success, or at least significance, might be around the next bend. And so I've been speaking on that a lot and working on those concepts as well. So that's something I really have enjoyed in this time.
So did you say you've been to Bangkok, or you're going to Bangkok?
I'm going.
Okay.
I did a virtual 8-week course with a school there, and that was hard because they're 12 hours different. So I was up and speaking at 5:30 in the morning. But I'm going in October, and then also going to Minnesota and Titusville and New Hampshire and some other spots in the next month or so.
Any other sports teams that are out on the horizon that you're going to be working with or speaking to that you see?
Not sure where that'll end up. I've got a couple that I'm talking to about going out, maybe to Kansas, maybe I continue to speak here to various teams at UF.
That's great.
And to Duke and the like. But
I appreciate you taking the time to come here and join me this morning. I hope we can do this again. I would like to, go into all of the background that you've had and touch on that, because there's things that I like to discuss. And I've talked with Carrie and Jeffrey Meldon, who you've been on their show before, on the father-son thing. And I would like to just spend some time on Nathan and his dad, and what it's like working together and that whole dynamic, because I think that's something that helps people along the line. So I appreciate you being here. Thank you very much.
And that'd be great, because he's a lot more interesting than I am. So that'd be terrific. We can do that.
Well, maybe we won't invite him in and just have you talk about that. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
This is Motivation You, the podcast. My name is Bob Ganzak. For Evan Miller, I appreciate you being here, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.